Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. Welcome to Tanenbaum's 2022 Religious Diversity Leadership Summit. This year's theme is Imagine, Create, Build, Embrace Religious Diversity. I'm Alexis.Kantor. I use she, her pronouns, and I have the incredible privilege of being a leader in sourcing and development at Target. I'm also a Jewish lesbian. I'm very grateful to the Target community for supporting the exciting and important work in this space. It is more important than ever to talk about the impact of religious diversity at work. At Target, our culture is built on care. To create a true culture of inclusion and belonging, we need to continue to work to build respect and dialogue around religious differences. Humans are complex, multidimensional, and intersectional. Nobody's unique dimensions of difference or lived experience or identities fits neatly in any box. It's impossible for me to disconnect my queerness from being Jewish. For me to show up as my most real self means knowing my values, working for a company that prioritizes inclusion and creates space for all to respectfully learn and grow together. For me, it is not about changing minds, but maybe changing hearts. It's about listening courageously and creating the longest and strongest olive branch you can. With that, I am now incredibly excited to turn it over to each one of our panelists to introduce themselves. We'll start with Eloiza.
Great. Thank you so much, Alexis. Hi, everyone. My name is Eloiza Domingo. I serve as one of the vice presidents for human resources and the chief diversity officer for the Allstate Corporation. I've been there about 11 months. My scope is HR, as well as all of the business operations and marketing and outreach and community operations for Allstate. We are excited to serve as one of the differentiated leaders in inclusive diversity and equity in the nation, and very happy to be here with you today.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Cadena. I'm Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion. My pronouns are she, her. So pleased to be here this morning to join in this conversation, and so value the relationship the Walt Disney Company has with Tanenbaum, and so honored to be accompanied by these amazing leaders. I lead our diversity and inclusion practice focused on marketplace practices at our enterprise across all areas of the Walt Disney Company. Thank you for having me.
Hello, I'm Wendy John. I'm the head of global diversity and inclusion at Fidelity Investments, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers.
Hello, my name is Federico Vescovi. I am in charge of the business of Asia, Africa, and Australia at Barilla, and I'm based in Singapore.
I would just like to thank you all for your introductions, and we will jump into the great questions now. Why is the topic of religious diversity in the workplace important to you, personally and professionally? And what drives your investment in this topic?
I'll just start personally. So my family is from the Philippines. My parents moved here from the Philippines in the 1970s to pursue what I think a lot of immigrants believe is the American dream. Certainly we pursue this, as well. For many of you who know the Philippines, the #1 religion there is Roman Catholic, and then the second is Islam. And so I was raised Roman Catholic, and it was, being Roman Catholic and also being Filipino were synonymous, and then when I learned about my own religion, spirituality, kind of faith, how that all kind of built in, I realized that as I got into work, particularly corporate America, it's interesting because that part of my identity wasn't talked about, very much. It wasn't recorded. We didn't really celebrate it. If we did in corporate America, it was kind of like whispers, right? It was like, well, it interested me because it was seen as a differentiator as opposed to something that brought people, together. So that was really interesting to me, especially as a leader in diversity, that why wouldn't, for me, again, growing up, that was such a critical part of my identity and such a critical part of me learning, to be an adult, and now as a parent, teaching that to my children as well, and teaching them to have kind of that holistic view of religion and faith and spirituality, that even as in my work as a leader of diversity, why were we cutting that part of the arm off, all of a sudden? That was curious, for me. Certainly with all of the things going on in the world, the polarization and how people use diversity as kind of a polarizing piece, I think what we oftentimes tend to do is we gravitate to the pieces of ourselves that are the most authentic, the things that we were taught when we were little, the things that save us, make us feel good, even if it's not as tangible as some other things, it helps, kind of keep us cohesive. So that's why I really think, especially now in this day and age, with so many things that are going on in our environment, any way that we can bring our authentic selves and encourage people to bring their authentic selves is really critical. All of these things, really make, a difference, and being able to acknowledge that, again, certainly makes, a difference. And so I'm really glad that we're opening up, that conversation and making it it's no longer the whispers, it's no longer like, oh, we're not supposed to do that. We're not really supposed to talk about that. And I'll say one last thing, because, most of my work has been in healthcare, and I worked a lot with pediatrics, kids who were very sick, hematology, oncology, mostly from the Arab Gulf. So coming over, many of them did identify as Muslim. And they, unfortunately, I saw a lot of kids pass away. And when medicine and operations could give them nothing else, the one thing that we could give them was supporting their faith and supporting their religion, and the ways in which religion has to do with death and dying, and the way somebody dies and how you take care of the body. There was nothing else the organization could give them, nothing, no medicines, no nothing, other than just the ability to honor their faith and their religion. That's the power, right, of it. And I still, why aren't we talking about it, in a variety of ways? So that, to me, is why, personally and professionally, it's so critical to have this conversation and start incorporating this change.
Thank you for the question. I think that religious diversity is something that is relevant for me, as you mentioned, both professionally and personally. I would start from the personal side. I was born and raised in Italy, which is a country that probably, as you know, is a relatively religiously homogeneous. Most of the population is Christian and Catholic in particular. And even if I worked and traveled across Europe, there was a certain homogeneous approach. The point on religion came to my attention very strongly when I moved to Singapore. Singapore is a very different society. It's a multicultural society, a multi-religion society, where 4 major religions are under one country. And actually, the religious harmony is one of the founding pillars of the society here. So I learned this by living in Singapore for the last 10 years, and I understood that religion and religious diversity is very important to understand people and to live harmoniously in a society. But then the business side was also interesting, because working in food, you start understanding that religion and food are intimately connected. I think about for the area I manage in the region, about kosher, halal, vegetarianism, just to mention a few. And you realize that it is important to cater for the dietary needs of the people we serve, and make sure that our products are compliant, because this will also unlock great growth opportunities. And this requires a certain degree of religious awareness in order to respect and serve at best our consumers.
Well, I am originally from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, which is very culturally and religiously diverse. And so for me, I think religious inclusion is important because I grew up in a framework that actually allowed for that, where we celebrated many different religions and some of the high holidays of the various religions, and had to get an understanding of the history. I actually studied religion as a child and had to read, the Bible, the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran. And one of the things that struck me was so much of what was in common in terms of some of the core values and virtues lives of the various religions. And so I've often thought about it as a place to bring people together. As someone who grew up in the Episcopalian faith, religion is a part of my identity as well. Although I can admit that I was not necessarily sharing that as freely, maybe in the first 10 years of my working career. It probably wasn't until I relocated from New England down to the South, to North Carolina, where religion is just part of the conversation. In fact, it sometimes is the starting point of many conversations as people welcome you to the area. And that was just such a different, experience for me in North America. And so where I live, there are no less than 8 different denominations of churches within a mile or two of my home. And so I feel like I just have seen, so many models for where understanding and getting to know and having a curiosity about each other's religious beliefs has actually helped open up conversation. And I think we find ourselves at a time right now where sometimes the topics that should be bringing us together instead are polarizing. And I know for many of my colleagues at Fidelity and elsewhere, their religion and their religious identity is such a core part of who they are and informs how they go about their lives and the work that they do. And so I think to have any conversation about inclusion and not be aware that religion is part of it, or maybe at the core of it for many, would be naive. And so it's complicated for sure, trying to balance out that conversation, and also being inclusive to those who do not believe in religion is important as well. But I do think it's possible.
Yes, so like Eloiza, actually, I'm a child of immigrants. Both my parents were born in other countries, came to the US as immigrants and in search of a better life. But so my heritage is Japanese, Mexican, and American. And my mother was raised Catholic, my father Buddhist, and my sister and I actually went to Sunday school at our local Presbyterian church around the corner. So I'm the living example of complexity of identity. And of course, in my day job, full inclusion and true belonging is our aspiration. And we know that to accomplish that pipe dream that we're all looking for is being seen in all aspects of our identity is central, absolutely central to our sense of belonging in the workplace and frankly in the world. And as a leader at the Walt Disney Company, most importantly for us, how folks see themselves in their full, rich, complex, multifaceted, intersectional identities is how we'd like to see them represented on screen, and both in representing them on screen, but making sure that we are accurate and nuanced and respectful of our representation. But we know that our audience wants to see themselves that way, and the complexity of those two things address their own identity, but also the way the world sees them. And so for us, expanding our practice to make sure we think about faith-based inclusion is absolutely critical to our practice. So thanks for the great question.
Christine, I'll throw the next question to you. I loved how you framed up how much representation matters, right? Especially for Disney. Can you share some examples of ways your organization has addressed religious diversity and how you feel that has benefited your organization or industry?
Absolutely. Some of the very baseline ways are with our employee resource groups. And often hosting what we call safe space conversations so that employees can celebrate and talk about their full identity, but more importantly, address the issues of the world. We all wish to live in a bubble where we're protected and living in an inclusive environment, but unfortunately we're not. And so many, and unfortunately, so many incidents of hate and targeting and polarization of our market seep into the workplace. And so providing a safe space for employees to be seen and heard and also to learn and recognize the full spectrum of their identity. No single person represents a faith-based system or a culture or an identity. So for us, providing that safe space via these employee resource groups, but more importantly, safe spaces where those conversations can be had. But one of the things I'm most proud of that we're working on actually with Tanenbaum right now is a new storytelling media guide. So this is a resource that we are sponsoring and funding and making available to the world. And the idea is a centralized location where you can, if you want to write a story, it could be as simple as a press release, a featured article about an employee, or more expansive, a short form video, a story for the big screen or the little screen. And in those cases, where to start, right? To number one, understand truth and nuance and practice. And the idea is this media guide, which will be ongoing and continue to evolve over time as culture does, as faith does, but be a resource for storytellers to refer to. And this is something we're super excited about, something we need to support our own creators and storytellers, but something we hope will benefit the world and most importantly, advance respect and understanding and frankly, belonging.
Thank you so much, Christine. Eloiza, do you want to jump in and answer that same question?
So Alexis, one of the main things that we're really doing around religion is what I call kind of the drumbeat in the background, which is the multicultural calendar. So we created, and actually Tanenbaum was one of our partners in this, is we created this multicultural calendar that looks at all of the ways in which we have cultural observances, right? Plus the religious observations, any holidays, those kinds of things. We did take kind of an empirical look at who all of our employees were, and then try to incorporate all of that into the calendar. And then as people say, hey, you missed this religion, or you missed this, thing, we write it in, right? And we make, we make those announcements. They're also attached to toolkits. So what is Ramadan? What do you need to know? But not just that, how does that impact things like your meetings in the mornings, your meetings in the afternoon? What does that mean for, the lunch meetings that you're having? I mean, so we kind of try to give practical advice. And again, I know that that's not a game changer, but what happens is that minimally there's a drumbeat in the background. So this calendar keeps going. The other thing too that I do is I send out every other month, there's a message that comes out for me, and it incorporates all of these things, right? And then I think similar to Christine, we have what we call IDE dialogues, which are the open conversations, safe spaces. The ERGs are doing a variety of things. What we're also doing is we're looking at how our benefits and total rewards are also incorporating, religion. As you know, in the United States, many of the ways that we take time off is based around Christian holidays, right? So you get the 4-day week at Easter time, right? You automatically get Christmas off and into, whatever. You don't get that for Ramadan. You don't get that for the high holidays. You don't get, that for those kinds of things. So what we're doing is really incorporating this conversation of floating holidays. And how can we think through that? How can we talk about that?
Wendy, I'd like to turn it over to you to answer the question also.
I would say at Fidelity, we are early in our journey as it relates to focusing on religious inclusion. We have had many associates that have asked us, about how do I bring my authentic self to work if I don't bring aspects of my religion or my religious beliefs with me. And we certainly want people to hold true to those beliefs. Although I think what we would say is we also have a customer obsession culture. And so we want to make sure that we are making everyone aware of the needs of our customers and how they identify, and that we're all able to engage with each other in a respectful and inclusive manner in the workplace, in the work that we do with each other, as well as with our customers. In the last year or so, what we've been able to do to really try to, create an environment where we can even have this discussion is I'd call up 2 key initiatives. The first is one called Days That Matter, where we've been creating awareness of important cultural, religious, and national or regional holidays that are celebrated and observed across our global footprint. We worked together with our affinity groups as well as a broader cross-functional team, and started first with creating resources and a calendar that's inclusive of many of these days that matter to our associates. And we provide a description of the day and the traditions around it to allow us all to support acknowledging the day as well as the celebrations and the observances that may go with it. We want our leaders and our team members, our associates, to be more planful around meetings and events, right? You know, we probably all have been in some scenario where inadvertently a large meeting was held on a key holiday. And so instead of being inclusive, we actually may have excluded some folks that were observing the traditions of that day and needed to time away to be with family and friends. And we want to try to minimize that happening, or certainly if it can't be avoided, find a way to incorporate acknowledging or celebrating the actual occasion with our associates who are also celebrating.
Oh my God, that was seriously, to the panelists, amazing information. And I think what I'm taking away really is there's nothing too big or too small, right? There's ways to influence an entire industry. There's ways to influence and change the mindset of an entire organization. Eloiza, I love the drumbeat, right? There is something about that consistency and equity of how information is shared. And you were speaking my language about some high holidays. I've had very interesting conversations through my career with some bosses, some good, some bad. So thank you for that. We'll jump into the next question. Organizations are increasingly focused on intersectional approaches to diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. How has religion and belief informed or influenced other areas of your organization's strategy or programming?
And frankly, the idea of nothing too big or too small. And we try to think about it, inclusion as a practice that begins with you, your own growth, your own learning, and then impacting those around you. And to the point, growing competency, helping you on your own journey is the place to start. And so very much thinking about it from a standpoint of learning and development at an individual level, at a leader level, at a team level, and at a company-wide level. So building that acumen across the business, and to the point, leveraging how we recognize holidays, building that acumen amongst leaders. And out of it, the growth in our ERGs has been tremendous. And it's exciting to see their voice grow, and both in educating our individuals, but widespread change around the company, impacting benefits, impacting how we think about our content, how we think about going to market. And that's really exciting to see the voices coming from inside. And then I was going to add to it a much more nuanced understanding of DEI and our practice. We are like all on a journey, and there are areas where we lead and there are areas where we're behind. And I think anyone who says they're done is not being truthful, because it is an ongoing journey, as culture and identity are. And so as we grow in the complexity of our understanding of identity, and what we're seeing more and more as our younger cast members or employees bring their own identities to our workplace, we hear a stronger expectation of nuanced understanding. And yet that same diversity by generation and of expectation is existing in one workplace at one time. So the idea of some employees are on a journey because they're coming from a place of my faith is always thought about as outside of the workplace. And then addressing generations where the expectation is you should accept all of my identities in their nuance all the time. And it's exciting to watch a workforce evolve and grow. And so that learning, supported by new benefits, new rules, new ways of thinking about how to conduct meetings and when to conduct them. Just really exciting, and to the point, nothing too small, but we know that over time the impact is huge. So so many ways that we're seeing it come to the workplace, and I'm excited to see what our practice is going to look like in 2 years' time.
Thank you. Thank you. Eloiza, you want to answer that question too?
Yeah, first of all, I think intersectionality is so important. I mean, similar to what Christine said, I think a lot of it for us has to do with education. I saw this really great presentation recently about bias, and the presenter talked about generational bias, which was, good. And then what she did is she talked about the intersections, and she took religion, race, language, right, and intercepted them. And all of a sudden, I mean, and we were all diversity practitioners in the audience, but it was just that to say, oh my gosh, like that, wow, that shifts somebody from a Gen X plus Jewish plus lesbian plus that really, wow, that like shifts, right? The way that you then operate, the way that you handle, a variety, of things, and the way that we just talk about, things. So for us, a lot what we think about is just that, the way that we operate, the way that we put together marketing and commercials. One thing that I pushed Allstate a lot on, if you see some of our commercials, it's and again, I'm pushing them on this. We have kind of one body type, right? It's like, okay, and they wear a certain kind of clothes. It's like, so that infers a certain socioeconomic status, right? The coupling right now is primarily heterosexual. And then we have the actors are primarily people who kind of look like me, who could pass for a whole bunch of, kind of stuff. And then we have kids who kind of look like me, right? And so that's fine, but how is it that we're also looking at the pictures, in our libraries, the people in our productions, that we're actually inferring and messaging, it might be covert, but or overt, I don't know, messaging, that there is a level of intersectionality that we're paying attention to, whether it's something as small as a cross that somebody's wearing, or some sort of like, a wig or whatever, So I push the organization a little bit to think, through that. As I mentioned earlier, Allstate, for many of you who already know, Allstate is one of these very traditional, we are like a brand, right? We're one of those very strong insurance brands that will live. That traditionality though, part of my job is to disrupt that, and part of my job is to ask the questions, well, what about this?
Federico would like to give you an opportunity to answer the question.
At Barilla, we have a system of diversity, equity, and inclusion that is based on ERGs, so the employee resource groups. As you know, these are a group of employees that come together to address or to talk about some aspect of a specific aspect of diversity, and they come with proposal to the company. And actually, for example, the proposal of the day for the festivity of every employee, came from an ERG. We have 15 of them at Barilla, spanning from gender diversity, interfaith, diverse abilities, age, and so on. And they are overall coordinated by the D&I board at Barilla. Now, we don't have, or we have very little ERGs that are intersectional. They usually are there when it's needed. So the idea is that we want to make sure that the ERG create plans that are relevant for the local markets. So we are taking a very local approach to each of the market on Vienna. For example, here in Singapore, where our employee population is relatively young, there will be less drive for an age ERG, while there is more for interfaith ERG, because it's a more multicultural society. So this is the approach we are taking. Of course, it might be that there will be an intersection across ERGs, including interfaith, but it has to be defined and decided by the local markets.
From all the panelists, I love what you're building on here, and even as you think about not forcing people to pick parts of their identity, but understanding it's the layered and the intersectional moments that will bring us to different outcomes and impacts. So thank you. You all represent very different industries and geographic regions. Can you share about the opportunities and challenges of navigating religious diversity with global perspective in mind?
Well, it's a great question. I think, when we start to think about religious diversity with, from a global perspective, to be honest, we might start to think, wow, that's vast and there's many more religions, but we probably would be surprised to know how many religions exist just even within, the United States or North America. There's tremendous religious diversity, including those employees that have no religious affiliation. And so what we continue to encourage from an opportunity standpoint is, again, focus first on understanding, right? Asking people not questions like, that are limiting, but more open-ended in terms of, do you have a faith practice? Or tell me more about whether, your faith practice, if you have one, versus asking about specific religions per se. We encourage our associates to focus on allyship. And so, if someone maybe is having a religious observance, I can think of an example typically that might come up is, especially when we were back together and gathering, might be, we're having an event as a team building and there's a lot of food and there's someone who maybe is fasting, right? And so it shouldn't only be up to that individual to always have to explain why they might not be partaking. And certainly we don't want others ribbing them along, right? We want to make sure that we're making some space to share a little bit more, and that someone feels comfortable being able to say, that the individual is fasting or observing their holiday. And maybe that could invite some conversation where everyone gets a little bit more education about, what the specific traditions are. We coordinate across all of our affinity groups for enterprise-wide events and recognitions. And because our affinity groups are open to all, they really serve as a model for inclusion. And so, we actually all participate right across the various affinity groups in different celebrations around religious holidays. And so I think we want to continue to invite that discussion. As you think about the geographies where you might have associates, making sure that you're taking that into account, which is one of the things we did with our Days That Matter initiative that I mentioned before.
The opportunity and the challenge on religion is communication. And I will give you a few examples. For us, the key word about religious diversity is interfaith. And this was a very carefully chosen word because we realized that communication is key. Interfaith is an inclusive word. So we start from the angle of all religion and none sometimes, because we have a number of free thinkers in our organization. And therefore, we don't start from a minority or a majority, but we start from the positive element of including all the religions. And it's very important to use words that are non-divisive. So this is the great opportunity, because once you enter from this angle, you will have more people joining our ERG, and therefore more ideas and more collaboration from our employees and stakeholders. But the challenge at the same time is being very clear on the communication, because, and we had the experience, people is not immediately clear on what interfaith means. So we have to be very, very clear that it's about inclusion. It's about all the religion, including the minorities. And I have to say that our team, our ERG of Connect, has launched this year a plan of religious awareness for small religions. And, you know, there are very small faiths, especially in the Middle East. And we are discovering that some of our employees belong to these religions, but they were not yet able to speak up. And therefore, we are now including them as well, because they don't feel that this is a minority or a majority topic, but is an all-encompassing topic.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Allstate right now, we have properties and entities primarily in India, Northern Ireland, Canada, Mexico, a little bit in London, a little bit in China, but primarily ours is India and Northern Ireland. You know, exactly to your note, you know, Alexis, this idea, when I talk with our constituents in India and I ask them, okay, so how are you defining diversity? How are you defining that? And how do you want to kind of move forward? The three things that they said, and really it was in this order, was gender primarily female, and LGBTQ, which I thought was fascinating. That really kind of threw me a little bit. And then of course, religion, you know, and what I thought was interesting is I said, well, what about race and ethnicity? And they said, well, 100% of our Allstaters who are in India do identify, you know, as Indian, but not all of them identify within that same, you know, religion. And the piece is that how do we talk about that? You know, how do we talk about that? How do we incorporate that? How do we respect that, you know, in our company? You know, for us, a lot of it is having a global local look. You know, I come from many organizations, Johns Hopkins, Cincinnati Children's, other universities and things that were much more global than Allstate. And so it was really critical for me as a chief diversity officer to set a percentage of goals and operations that would incorporate global and local. So at Hopkins, it's the best way that I can think about it. It was a 60-40. So 60% of the time we were all kind of following and incorporating a global look at diversity, primarily looking at male, female, because everybody had that data. Primarily looking at, you know, engagement data, you know, some things that were going to be true regardless of where you were. And then the 40% was to allow the localization, right? And figure out how we were going to support that and make sure that we have the resources, you know, to support that. So to me, whenever, you know, people say, oh, you know, we're an international company, that is a really difficult thing to say, because I think that in my opinion, especially running a global program or a diversity program for a global organization, you really need to say, okay, that's fine. We can have a percentage of our time in our operations that are pushing towards a global view. But at the same time, how are we specializing and focusing on the needs and in the independent or catered aspects of the different regions around, you know, around the globe. So again, Allstate is still working on that. For me right now, I started about a year ago. I'm still working on the Allstate US piece. We will globalize next year. Our efforts will globalize next year. I am lucky in that, again, we have a very small percentage of the whole world that is part of a global entity. But those are some of the things that I think about when I kind of think about a global model.
I really love that perspective. And it's just so interesting that these aren't just moments for us to think about this. I was coming off of another meeting today where this was part of the conversation about the balance of global, local, and the way you put your perspective on it, I think is just incredibly helpful. So thank you. As leaders of organizations that are committed to tackling the topic of religious DEI, what advice do you have for anyone that remains uncertain about addressing religion in the workplace?
I can certainly appreciate and understand the apprehension that many might have about addressing religion in the workplace. I'm sure we've all heard it at some point, right? Religion and politics are the two things that you don't ask about or perhaps don't engage in discussion about. But the reality is that it exists. And people's religious beliefs are very core to who they are, and it shows up in who they are and how they engage. And I think this is a real opportunity to really first start with understanding, the organization that you're in and where the organization is, and start small and start slowly, right? Like I said, this can be complex in terms of, either the number of different religions. I promise you, you're going to learn something. I learn something new every day. I learn about potentially new religions or new religious observations. And so I think you have to come to this with a bit of an intellectual curiosity. I think, you have to also, make the connection between not just your environment and your associates, but the customers and the clients that you serve. How might religion show up for them? And so for us, we're very focused on creating relevant and differentiated experiences. And we believe in order to do that and to be able to anticipate and meet our customer needs, we need to have broad perspectives coming from diverse populations and a wide group of people.
It is very interesting because it is very personal, I have to say. And I will just tell a story. I think it's about shaving off the judgment that come with religion and look at religion for what it is, which is an important part of people's life that is important to share about. I was born and raised in Italy, as I mentioned, and probably you might or might not know that you are raised in Italy with the rule or the education manner that you don't talk about politics and religion, particularly if you have guests at home. So it's a kind of taboo topic, and therefore, and we are raised this way. So every time I started talking about religion, particularly in Europe and in Italy, people was looking at me strangely, because these are not topics that you talk about in front of others, and it took time to convince about the positive impact of talking about religion in the organization. But then, of course, if you bring forward the facts, which meant that at the end of the day, we can serve more consumers and we can cater the need of more people, and then our growth opportunities increase on one side. You have a more engaged organization because their needs are also catered for. And at the end of the day, you are able to have a better impact on your business and your people, then, of course, the organization is more keen to talk about it. The other point is how we do it. We didn't create a full blast plan. We started with awareness. The first step is always awareness. So we had a 1-year awareness plan on religion, the importance of interfaith, the key religions that are part of the team here in the region, in Asia, Africa, and Australia. And then people had the time to adapt, understand, and then embrace DRG. And to my very much surprise and very much satisfaction, even employees from outside of Asia, Africa, and Australia region now are joining the DRG, which means that this embracing the topic is going beyond this organization.
Hey, lastly, we'll finish up with, what would you say is an aspirational vision for including religious identity in the culture, policies, or practices of your company? In other words, how do you hope your company's efforts around religious diversity will evolve in the future? And we can start with Christine.
Well, if you start with the central idea that a fully inclusive workplace is a priority, as it is at the Walt Disney Company, And that is that inclusive workplace is central to high-performing companies and best serving your consumers. Then you really have to start to think about what does that look like from all dimensions. And you have to take a very forward-looking approach in how do we serve employees so that they can bring their full authentic self to the workplace. We know that not only if we can create a place of mutual respect and understanding, then that's where creativity and excellence thrives. And for us, making sure that, like all dimensions, number one, employees are seen for their full spectrum of identity, that they're supported through our benefits, through our workplace practices, and most importantly, how they're able to show up in this world, and particularly in our workplace where we have control over their experience. But beyond that, we see that we have a responsibility to then portray and tell the stories of our nuanced employee experiences, but frankly, the experiences of our customers, and to respect them and to honor them and to tell their stories in their full spectrum of identity. And so for us, that's our vision of a reimagined tomorrow and how we'd like to show up. And with that, everything that goes along with that, our workplace practices, our policies, our benefits, and frankly, our business practices.
Yeah, I mean, I think for many of us, we probably, already have started, tapping into some of this, whether it's by creating spaces for prayer, for those that may have specific times of day that they need to pray, or just acknowledging that is part of their tradition, or even just having the conversations and celebrating some of these very important days. I think, that in terms of aspirational vision, I'm going to draw back to sort of, where I started off in terms of my lived experience in the early part of my life, where, even though you might not have been of a particular religion, you understood the nature of the religious celebration, and oftentimes would participate and be invited to participate by those that were celebrating. That was sort of par for the course for me. And so I hope that, in terms of aspiration, that just becomes the way that, we all are engaging with each other, where we feel comfortable sharing these aspects of our lives with each other, sharing those traditions, and that we want to join in and we want to learn more. So, that's what I'd say. I think our companies will be better for it. I think the products and services that we deliver will also demonstrate that. And I do think that, while some may be still very tentative, I hope that this becomes sort of like a non-factor in the future, and it's just part of the fabric of how we engage with each other, and just that we understand that this is an important dimension for many people.
I think that it's a journey. Like every journey, the beauty is the journey as well as the arrival. I think that the destination is still far, and sometimes at times is also uncertain, because this is a very new and uncharted territory. But in terms of approach, it has to be about listening, understanding, and integrating. Listening, because we don't know. I mean, at least at Barilla, and especially in this region, we are still relatively small. So we don't know a lot of things. So the best way of knowing is listening. Listening carefully. Then, as we listen, we have to understand. And this is where our employees and our stakeholders will help us, because sometimes we will be exposed to things that are theoretically unfamiliar, but they have a meaning and they have a value. And then once we listen, when we understand, we will integrate the learning that we will have. The one that, of course, are relevant for our business, our company, our people. And we will restart the cycle. So if I look at the experience we had in the last 2 years, we listened, for example, to our employees in the Middle East that were having a different work week than in the West. And we had to harmonize the two things. So we canceled all the meetings, or we made sure that all the regional global meetings involving Middle East would not happen on a Friday. And this was a first simple step. It was not easy to execute, to be honest, because we had to change the company calendar. But it was very effective. And again, the point on the festivity, as I mentioned, and many policies are coming up, as well as how we communicate on our packs and in our communication in general. So I think it is very important to create this cycle and this habit of listening, understanding, and integrating with another mind.
Yeah, no, I would just underline what Christine, is saying. I think that, if we're really talking about authenticity, bringing your whole self, and again, I would underline the fact that we're in a type of world right now that I think is super confused when it comes to religion. I think that religion and diversity people use it a lot to polarize and to confuse and to cause chaos. When it could actually be relatively simple, and so I think that's where a lot of companies see that environmentally and say, oh my gosh, I want to stay away from that. That's a huge risk. Why? That's weird, and I think that it's our job to make it as simple as possible, in the same way that, somebody identifies these are the various things, this is why I became who I am. It is that, simple. I mean, you opened, Alexis, with a great question around, what is it personally, to me? And again, I mean, for me growing up, it was two primary things: being Filipino and being Catholic. I mean, everything about my upbringing, everything that I wore, everything where I went to school, how I thought about living and dying as growing up was through those two lenses. That's it, and oftentimes that is the way for many people, so then why wouldn't we incorporate that into the corporate world? So I think it's relatively simple. I think the world has made it a little bit more complex. So our job is to kind of reverse engineer that and operationalize it a little bit, which can also be very difficult. But I think it's kind of a no-brainer. I really do. Although like I said, I realize that it's easier said than done.
I love this whole journey with all of the panelists. Thank you so much. This topic is super intersectional. There are complexities. Eloiza, I love that you broke it down. Sometimes we have to start really simply and reverse engineer it. You're talking to my engineering self there. And create thriving creativity. And so I hope that everyone listening was as inspired as I was by these incredible panelists. It is a journey. It is continuous learning. There's risk and reward, but we all play a role, big and small. Thank you all so very much. This is such an important topic, and it will only get more important as we think about future generations and the nuances that you've all talked about in terms of ensuring everybody can show up as their full self. Thank you.